Hey everyone! Tonight, we are going to delve into the chilling tale of the cursed lighthouse keeper who vanished without a trace, a story of isolation, dread, and lingering shadows that refuse to release their hold on sanity. In this narrative, you'll follow the newly appointed keeper as he confronts strange whispers, inexplicable phenomena, and the malevolent force that lurks beneath the lantern's glow. Through storm-lashed nights and creeping oil-black stains, the boundary between reality and nightmare frays with every flicker of the beacon. So before we get started, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel so I can keep making better videos. Now enjoy a cup of hot tea and let's embark on this journey together tonight. Rain pounded the iron railing as the lighthouse cutter braced against the dock. Waves slammed the rocky shore below in a thunderous applause that seemed less celebratory than accusatory. Gabriel Montero stepped forward, cloak drawn tight around his shoulders, and gazed upward at the towering sentinel of stone. Its windows were dark pupils watching him, and in those voids, he felt the weight of history, each previous keeper's silent vigil, etched into the damp mortar. A gust ripped through the harbor, flinging salted spray at his boots. The air smelled of brine and something fouler, stale fear. Instinct urged him to retreat, but duty and a modest stipend propelled him up the spiral steps toward the front door. With a leather-knuckled glove, he grasped the iron ring and pulled. The door refused to budge at first, then groaned open as though complaining of fresh disturbance after years of empty nights. Inside, the foyer was lit only by the flash of lightning beyond the glass panes. Flickers of pale electric light revealed dusty benches, a rusted oil lamp sconce, and water staining the walls like tear tracks. Gabriel's boots clicked on the tile floor as he advanced each step, stirring motes that danced in the air like trapped fireflies. The hush pressed against his eardrums, so thick it felt like static. His breath came in deliberate gulps. Even seasoned mariners warned newcomers of the lighthouse's hush how silence here carried voices. Gabriel thought the caution quaint until he stood alone amid utter stillness that buzzed with unspoken words. He raised a hand and touched the cold stone beside the doorway. The wall felt alive, permeable. A faint pulse like a heartbeat seemed to vibrate through the masonry. He shook off the sensation and crossed to the central staircase. Each bronze step was slick underfoot. A drifting candle on a windowsill sputtered as if reacting to his presence and threw elongated shadows that coalesced into shapes just beyond recognition. Turning, he caught one such shade slipping away down the hallway. His pulse quickened. Gabriel carried a battered satchel containing his modest belongings, spare oil flasks, a small tin of matches, and a hastily written memorandum of the lighthouse's operational schedule. Beyond the foyer, a narrow hallway branched left and right. To the right lay the keeper's quarters, his new home. To the left, the corridor wound toward the tower's core. He paused, listening. The only sound was his own ragged inhalation, and beneath it, the distant hiss of wind. Opting for quarters first, Gabriel followed the hallway to a stout wooden door. He inserted the brass key and turned it with a click that echoed unnaturally loud. Entering, he saw the small room arranged for a solitary occupant, a narrow cot, a writing desk, and a chipped basin on a pedestal. The window faced the storm-tossed sea, its shutters clattering like tremors in the deep. He crossed to the basin and ran a hand under the faucet. cold water sputtered out, leaving droplets that trembled before falling like someone watching him from the darkness. He lit an oil lamp on the desk. The flame sputtered, coughing out a thin trail of smoke that curled toward the low ceiling. The lamp's glow carved a small sanctuary in the gloom, but the edges of the room remained shrouded. Gabriel set down his bag and studied the desk, etched initials and crude doodles, perhaps left by the previous keeper. A scrap of journal paper peeked from beneath a blotter. He hesitated, but curiosity won. He reached for the paper, and as his fingers brushed the edge, the lamp trembled, sending shadows dancing frantic patterns across the walls. Outside, thunder rolled like drums tuned to a funeral march. Gabriel's heartbeat thrummed in time. He opened the scrap to reveal the first of several frantic entries. They are always watching. The lamp is hungry. A cold dread pooled in his stomach. He glanced around. The room felt suddenly smaller, as if the walls had drawn closer. He slammed the scrap back in place, heart hammering, and blew out the lamp with trembling fingers. Darkness claimed him. Silence followed deeper than before. In that void, he thought he heard a distant footstep, soft, deliberate, and climbing the spiral stairs. Gabriel swallowed hard, groped for his satchel, and steeled himself for the long night ahead. Gabriel's fingers trembled as he lifted the lantern from its hook in the lamp room at the tower's pinnacle. The flame within danced and shivered, veins of pale light seeping into the corners of the circular chamber. Outside, the gale clawed at the narrow windows, assaulting the glass with a barrage of rain so fierce it sounded as though the sea itself sought entry. He pressed one hand to the cold metal of the lantern's handle, bracing himself against the tremor of wind that rattled every stone in the tower. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, inhaling deep. The stench of salt water and damp iron filled his lungs, mingling with a metallic tang he couldn't place. When he opened his eyes again, the lamp's light had grown steadier. A small, defiant sun in the encroaching darkness. Gabriel set the lantern on its pedestal and rotated the mechanism to bring the lens to life. A warm glow flared outward, slicing through the tempest in regular sweeps. Each rotation revealed the raging sea, and the jagged coastline beyond transformed into a shifting panorama he was charged to watch over. Thunder cracked in response, a deafening roar that seemed to emanate not from the sky, but from the belly of the tower itself. The floor trembled beneath him, as if the very foundation bore witness to something deep within the earth. Gabriel's pulse jumped. He reached to secure the lantern more firmly, and his fingertips brushed against something slick and cold. He recoiled, flicking the lamp away. Oil spattered across the metal floor in dark arcs, hissing as it met the fierce lantern flame. For a heartbeat, he thought the flame would flare uncontrollably, but it steadied the oily smear, absorbed into the metal without igniting. A low moan rose from somewhere below, a resonant note that seemed shaped like a word, his name. Gabriel. It unfurled through the corridors behind him. He spun lantern, raised light trembling across the walls in frantic crescendos. No one stood in the hallway. Only warped stone and the swirl of dust stirred by every gust. The echo repeated louder. Gabriel. It was a voice like the wind, but purposeful, shaped by intent. He swallowed, jaw clenched. He knew he shouldn't answer, and yet the instinct to speak stabbed at him. "Who's there?" His voice cracked. Silence. The lamp pivoted again, revealing the bleak horizon. Black water heaving beneath a sky shredded by lightning. Each flash illuminated the tower's silhouette, turning it momentarily into a giant's finger, pointing accusingly at the stars. When the thunder subsided, the voice spoke again, closer now, as if just beyond the glass. "Gabriel," it hissed. He pressed his cheek against the cold stone wall, feeling its rough granules dig into his skin. Behind him, the lamp's hum deepened rhythmic, and he realized the mechanism was moving on its own. The light paused mid-rotation, the beam slashing the wall at an unnatural angle. He yanked at the crank. It resisted. The lens rattled and groaned, and the wind's moan intensified until it was almost painful. Gabriel spun the crank with all his strength, forcing the beam back into motion. Finally, the resistance ceased, and the lens resumed its steady sweep. He exhaled shoulders, sagging with relief, and then he heard it, the rash slap of footsteps on metal below. His heart thundered in his ears. He rushed to the open window and peered down the spiral stairs through the grated balcony. A shadow scaled the steps exactly in time with the lamp's rotation, one step per turn, as though pacing himself to the beam's rhythm. Gabriel's knuckles went white around the lantern's handle. He called, "Stop." But the figure paused only when the light swung away, melting back into darkness. He shuttered the window. The temperature dropped abruptly, and the flame sputtered. He reached behind to steady the lamp, and froze. The glass was smeared with dark streaks, like tears dragged along by a desperate hand. He pressed the pad of his thumb to the smear, and felt a faint pulse, as though the stain were alive. His skin prickled. He yanked back, wiping the smear on his sleeve. The smear resisted adhering until he tore the cloth. A pang of revulsion stabbed him when he saw the oil had not come off. Instead, it had pooled into a small puddle on the floor, quivering. Lightning arced across the sky, and in that split second of brilliance, Gabriel saw a face in the puddle's reflection, hollow-eyed, grinning with impossible teeth. The face wavered, dragged itself toward him, and then the light died, plunging the room into eclipsing darkness. He lit a match, igniting a fresh wick in the lantern. Pale light blossomed once more, but the puddle had vanished. His breath hitched. In the dull glow, the walls behind him seemed to ripple as though watching him from within. He coughed nervously, catching sight of the journal scrap he had stuffed in his coat pocket. The scrap fluttered against his chest as though something beneath his shirt tried to surface. He crept toward the desk, sat down, and flicked open the journal to the first full entry. It ran cold with fear. Night 2. The lamp hungers for warmth. I can almost see it moving. It whispers my name, and if I do not answer it, becomes louder. Gabriel traced the jagged handwriting with a finger. The words seemed to pulse under his touch, alive. He closed the journal with a snap. His ears burned with a sound like dry paper tearing an unseen page, flicking somewhere in the tower. He jumped to his feet, heart galloping. The steps upstairs cried out as if someone banged a metal rod on each stair. He crept to the door and listened. The sounds passed him, climbing ever higher. Something reached the lamp room threshold and paused. The heavy silence pressed in again. Gabriel exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding, then turned back to the lantern. It glowed unevenly. The beam pulsed once, twice, as if the lamp itself had lungs. He raised the lamp and inspected the wick. It was singed, crackling like dry wood, but intact. Yet he couldn't shake the sensation that the lantern had inhaled the oil from his spilled puddle, growing stronger on some invisible feast. He swallowed, voice hoarse. "I hear you," he whispered, voice steadier than he felt. "Who are you?" The wind shrieked through the vents in reply, carrying a whispered chuckle. Gabriel's skin crawled. Every hair stood on end. He stared at the lamp's glass, noticing for the first time that the lens had scratched runes, etched into its mounting bracket tiny archaic symbols he couldn't decipher. A flicker at the staircase drew his gaze. A single, distant bolt of lightning illuminated something drifting down the steps. A long coat brush of black fabric, as if someone had slid out of their attire mid-descent and left it behind. The coat shimmered for a moment in the afterglow, then vanished when the next flash came. Gabriel shook his head, incredulous. The storm raged on, but within the tower, the wind's assault felt gradually less violent, as though the storm itself hesitated at the threshold of the lamp room. He gripped the lantern tightly and stepped away from the desk. He needed to secure the corridor to find the coat or whatever had abandoned it, to prove to whatever watched him that he would not be cowed. As he opened the door to the spiral stairs, the lamp's beam followed his hand, carving a path of golden light into the twisting darkness. Thunder rumbled, and for a moment, Gabriel thought he heard his own name spoken in tandem with the thunder, two voices merging into one. He braced himself and descended, lantern held high, into the gale's empathic whisper of his fate. Gabriel hesitated on the first landing of the spiral staircase, heart pounding in cadence with the storm's fury outside. His lantern's beam slashed through the gloom, illuminating the cold, worn stone steps that curled upward and downward into pitch-black uncertainty. Each exhale sent small clouds of mist spiraling into the lantern's glow, and with every step he descended, the distant rolling thunder seemed to retreat, as though the storm itself was penned outside and he was sinking deeper into another world, one ruled by silent horrors. Where the stairs curved, the gallery landing opened into a narrow corridor, its ceiling arched like a stone ribcage. The walls here bore old water stains, mottled with decay and spectral patterns that flickered whenever the lantern passed. Gabriel had not ventured this way before. Routine dictated his patrol of the lantern room and his quarters, but the sense of something calling him, laced with dread, compelled him forward. His wet cloak whispered against the wall as he edged along lantern-playing chase with his shadow, until it elongated into grotesque formed shapes of emaciated figures hunched and reaching. Halfway down the hall, Gabriel froze. The air shifted, growing dense and still, as though something had drawn every breath in this passage. The lantern sputtered its wick, stuttering, and the sound of his own heartbeat threatened to drown out all else. Then, faint, distant, he heard it, a low, melodic hum, like a lullaby half remembered. Sad and discordant, it wound through the corridor, growing louder, as though carried by the walls themselves. "Hello?" Gabriel called, his voice brittle. The hum ceased at once, and in the sudden silence, he could hear his blood pounding in his ears. Seconds passed, heavy with expectation, until a soft click echoed from ahead, the sound of a door latch releasing somewhere unseen. Gabriel's pulse leapt. He crept forward, breath-caught lantern raised awkwardly before him, each footstep deliberate to avoid announcing his approach. The corridor ended in a pair of heavy wooden doors, one slightly ajar. Beyond the gap lay darkness deeper than the rest, the lantern's glow failing to penetrate more than a few inches. Gabriel's hand closed around the cold iron knob. He willed himself not to retreat. He needed to know what lay beyond. With a deep breath, he pushed the door open. The room beyond was small, maybe once a storage closet, its walls lined with old maritime charts and dusty crates. At its center stood a tall, narrow mirror framed in tarnished brass. Faint moonlight filtered through a high, barred window, painting the mirror's surface in ghostly rectangles. Gabriel stepped closer, heart pounding, captivated by the gleam of the glass. The mirror's surface rippled. The reflection first showed his own face pale, tense, and then it shifted. His eyes darkened. His lips stretched into a cruel smile that wasn't his. He jerked back, lantern swinging wide, catching the mirror in a brighter glare. The reflection stayed distorted. Those hollow eyes stared at him, unblinking, the smile widening until it was a slash of white in shadow. Gabriel scrabbled for words. "This isn't real." But the mirror snapped to normal, his own wary expression staring back. He let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Then the mirror winked. One of his reflected eyes blinked twice as many times as his real ones. His jaw twitched in the glass independently of his flesh. He spun away, nearly tripping over a crate. The mirror sprang to life behind him, his reflection stepping forward, reaching an arm out of the glass toward him. Panicked, Gabriel swung the lantern high. The reflection's hand pressed against the far side of the glass, leaving a pale smudge that pulsed softly like a fading heartbeat. He struck the mirror's surface, with the lantern's base shattering the glass in a starburst of cracks. Cold air gusted through the broken window, carrying a whisper that seethed in the shards. Echoes remained. The shards tinkled to the floor. Gabriel stepped back, backing into the door. His lantern's flame flickered violently, as though buffeted by an unseen breath. Then it steadied, casting long ribbons of light across the fragmented mirror. He forced himself to look at the wreckage. No figure remained, but in the cracks he saw dozens of faint, distorted reflections, moments from every angle of the room, each rippling with static energy. One shard showed him wide-eyed and terrified, kneeling before the lamp room's door. Another depicted him collapsed on the stairs. Each whisper played out like a broken recording, looping endlessly. Gabriel's legs trembled. He shut the door with a bang and pressed his shoulder against it. The corridor beyond felt impossibly distant. In the chaos of the storm outside and the stillness within, he realized with a sick twist that every fragment of glass housed its own echo, its own version of him trapped in an instant of fear. He raised the lantern and stared at the hallway. The arched ceiling above seemed to breathe, the stones shifting imperceptibly as though conscious. The lullaby hum began again, drifting to his ears from behind the doors. A low, mocking melody pulling at the edges of his mind. Gabriel swallowed his fear and moved. He pressed through the corridor, determined to seal off the shattered room before the echoes reached beyond. Each step felt heavier than the last. The stained walls pulsed with moisture as droplets dripped in counterpoint to his heartbeat. Halfway to the end, he halted. His voice whispered from behind him, "Gabriel?" He whirled lantern, shining into empty hall. The wind howled through the vents, but beneath it, he could hear his reflection's laughter, soft, cruel threading through the howl. He pointed the lantern at the vent. The grill rattled as though something pressed against it from the other side. He set his jaw. "I'm not afraid," he said aloud, but his voice cracked. He edged forward toward the lamp room door at the far end of the corridor. With every step, the whispers followed, skirting along the stone walls in an unreadable conversation. Reaching the lamp room door, Gabriel placed a hand on its cool surface. The lullaby faded into silence. Outside, the storm had quieted to a distant murmur. The air beyond the door contained the faint scent of oil and something acrid like burnt paper. He took a breath, steadied himself, then turned the knob and slid inside. The lamp room greeted him with its usual halo of golden light, but something was different. The beam wavered, and where it swept across the walls, the shadows flickered unnaturally slow. The remains of the oil puddle were gone, but scrawled onto the metal floor in dark residue were words, "Echoes live here." Gabriel exhaled. Shoulders slumped. He set the lantern down. The words stood in the golden light, and a distant laugh echoed up from the broken mirror's corridor. He squared his shoulders and picked up the lamp's crank. If the echoes were bound to the lighthouse, he would meet them on equal terms. He would guard the lamp, guard his sanity, and if they wished to echo, let them echo into a void. He turned the crank, and the lens rotated once, twice, in a steady, defiant pulse. Outside, the gale answered in kind wind, rattling the windows as though applauding his resolve. But as the beam swept back, Gabriel caught the barest flicker at the edge of the lens, an echo of movement, just beyond the glass, watching still. Gabriel retreated from the lamp room into the twisting corridors, each step muted against the stone walls that seemed to lean in curious to witness his next move. The echoes of that broken mirror room still clung to his nerves, but he forced himself to press onward, driven by the memory of that crumpled scrap he tucked into his coat. If the journal that produced those warnings lay hidden within this lighthouse, he needed to uncover it before his mind splintered into the same frantic verses. The voyage back to his quarters felt interminable. He passed the fractured gallery where the lullaby had taunted him, skirting its threshold with lantern held high. Beyond the hallways, silence pressed on him until he reached the stout wooden door he'd first unlocked upon arrival. He paused, his breath visible in the thin air, and keyed the lock with a rattling click. Inside, the room appeared as he'd left it, cot basin and a hidden desk, but tonight each object bore an aura of threat. Gabriel crossed to the desk, hands hovering above its surface. The lamp on the desk was absent. He'd left it in the lamp room, but the lantern in his grip cast harsh shadows across the blotter and the dusty stationery. He sank into the worn chair, heart hammering, and glanced at the drawers. The top drawer had held that scrap of paper. Now it beckoned again. His fingers found the iron knob and pulled. The drawer slid open with resistance, releasing a puff of dust motes that glimmered in the lantern's glow like ghosts. He peered inside. Beneath a rusted tin of spare matches lay a small bundle of leather straps bound around a thick, hardcover journal. Its cover was mottled with age, the leather dark as bruised flesh, and stamped faintly with a symbol he did not recognize, a curling spiral, half swallowed by straight lines that formed the shape of a lighthouse lantern. He withdrew the journal, setting it on the desk with reverent caution. The air around him felt suddenly charged, as though the very pages crackled with suppressed energy. The throttle of the storm outside had eased to a distant rumble, leaving an expectant hush in its wake. He raised the lantern closer, illuminating the journal's cover and the faint outline of the spiral insignia. His pulse surged. This was the forbidden account the source of every cryptic warning he'd glimpsed so far. He undid the leather cords, each loop releasing with a soft sigh, like breath escaping from a long-held hold. The strap slipped free, and he opened the cover. The first page was coated in a layer of grime so thick it had hardened into tiny ridges. Gabriel brushed the page with his fingertip. The grime flaked away in gray ribbons, revealing ink that rippled under the lantern's flame. He swallowed. The journal's entries were written in cramped, looping script that twisted downward in frantic cascades. He read the heading, Day 1 New Keeper's Arrival. Beneath it, the handwriting seemed steady. But as his eyes rose to the next entry, the letters wavered. He realized with a jolt that the journal was not linear. Notes from different nights were interleaved, punctuated with marginal scribbles and frantic question marks. His gaze dropped to the earliest coherent lines. They told me the light would guide ships to safety. But what if it guides something else? A chill coiled around Gabriel's spine. He turned the page, and another entry confronted him. Night 3. The wind slipped through the vents, singing my name. I answered. Now it answers back. His throat tightened. Every phrase seemed threaded with dread, each word a trapdoor beneath sanity. He flipped again, drawn despite himself. Oil stains appear by the lamp as though it bleeds. I feel its warmth, and I cannot look away. Gabriel's own memory surged forward. Images of that warm, oozing smear in the lamp room, the face in its reflection. He pressed 2 fingers to his mouth, tasting salt and fear. The journal pages rustled, and he thought he heard a sigh issuing from the binding itself. He paused to catch his breath. The storm's remnants tapped lightly against the window, but inside the silence was heavy with menace. He laid a steadying hand on the desk. Another page caught his eye. Its edges frayed and darker with old smudges. Night 7. The whispers bleed through the glass. Every phrase I do not comprehend becomes a scream. Gabriel leaned forward, heart pounding. His mind replayed the nights when voices had hissed his name, when the lamp's mechanism had moved on its own. He snapped the journal open again, seeking context. Night 9. I see him in reflections that are not mine. He follows my steps trapped in fractured glass. I shattered the mirror, but the shards still watch. His fingers trembled. The previous keeper had been here, had suffered the same horrors, and had documented them in these cryptic lines. Yet the text offered scant solace. It only confirmed that whatever haunted Gabriel had claimed another soul first. He straightened, running a hand through his damp hair. The only way forward was to finish reading, but part of him recoiled, desperate to close the journal and banish its words. He turned again, more entries, tumbling like broken shards. Night 11. Oil black smudges move against the light. They form words where none existed. They hunger for a voice. Gabriel stared at the page. He thought of the smeared letters on the lamp room floor, and how that oily script had spelled out warnings. He pounded a fist against the desk. These words were not mere stories, they were active, alive, and they had marked him too. The spiral insignia on the cover pressed against his mind like a sigil binding him to this fate. He paused, recalling the fragment he'd found on his first night. The lamp is hungry. Now he held the full context. The oil-black smudges were not accidents. They were portents, spelling out demands. The lamp required more than oil. It needed attention, perhaps even blood. He closed his eyes, memory flashing of the gross shimmer of that oily handprint in the lamp's chamber. He shuddered. He opened the journal to another page. Night 14. The corridor laughs. It curls around me like a serpent. I can't find my way back to the lamp. His chest grew tight. The corridors he'd traversed already seemed to warp and shift, as though the lighthouse itself was alive and feeding on his fear. He rose from the chair, journal in hand, and crossed to the window. Moonlight filtered through the shutter slats, casting thin lines across the room. Outside, the sea lay calm under a cloudy sky. But Gabriel knew better than to trust a lull after a storm. He closed the journal decisively, leather cover slapping shut. He tucked it beneath his arm, heart hammering. If the previous keeper's fate had been recorded so meticulously, perhaps there were clues to break the cycle. He needed to study every page, every cryptic line before the lamp's hunger consumed him completely. The lantern flickered. Gabriel exhaled, steeling himself. He returned to the desk, drawing a scrap of paper and a stubby pencil from his coat pocket. He laid both on the blotter and opened the journal once more to the beginning of the earliest entries, determined to chart a course through the madness. He would decode the warnings, confront the oil and the whispers, and reclaim the lantern's light as a beacon of protection rather than a siren's call. As he set pencil to paper, the journal trembled in his hand as though eager to deliver its next secret. Beyond the desk in the hallway, he thought he heard the soft scrape of something dragging across stone. Gabriel paused, lantern raised, and listened. The scrape grew louder, joining with a distant rattling. Perhaps the corridor's laughs spilling into this room. He rubbed his grips on the journal's spine and pressed forward, determined to map the horrors line by line. The previous keeper's frantic warnings were no longer idle prose. They were a lifeline. Gabriel would follow them to their end, even if the final entry spelled his own doom. Gabriel stood just inside his quarters, the journal clasped tight against his chest, its leather cover slick with the damp of his palms. The hallway beyond was wrapped in the lighthouse's deep hush, broken only by the rhythmic pulse of the lamp room's beam, slicing through the slitted window. He glanced at the small clock on his desk. Midnight. The hour when the veil between this world and the next was at its thinnest, and when the previous keeper's entries had grown increasingly unhinged. He placed the journal on the blotter and lit the desk lamp. Its pale glow spilled across the pages, illuminating margins scrawled with frantic symbols and arrows pointing toward later entries. Gabriel inhaled, bracing himself for the passages that he dreaded most, the midnight vigil. He flipped to the page marked Night 15 Midnight Vigil. The handwriting was so jagged, it seemed carved rather than written. I stayed at the lantern room at midnight as instructed. The beam trembled and I saw beyond the storm. Something waited in the wash of the light. I thought I could bargain with it, but bargains are for the foolish. He swallowed hard. The instructions laid out by the previous keeper were clear enough. Remain in the lantern room through midnight's passage. Resist the hunger of the lamp and observe the thing it attracted. Gabriel squared his shoulders. He had prepared for this loading spare oil, equipping the lantern with a fresh wick and fastening his satchel with emergency supplies. He rose and donned his heavy coat, the fabric damp and musty, then tucked the journal safely into a pocket. He locked his door behind him and set out. The spiral stairs loomed like a tunnel into oblivion. Each step echoed his approach, and as he ascended, the stillness reinforced his solitude. 2 flights up, he paused at the broken mirror's corridor, recalling the shattering that had freed echoes into the walls. He ignored the urge to peer inside and hurried on, lantern held aloft. At the lamp room door, he paused, hand on the knob. beyond lay the heart of the curse. He pushed the door open. The lamp room's hush welcomed him warmer and more oppressive than any storm. The great Fresnel lens sat at the center, its curved glass facets dark except where Gabriel's lantern struck them. He placed his coat on a stool, then set the portable lantern atop a small table. He knelt beside the oil reservoir, checking its levels full. Good. He wiped fresh oil on his hands, feeling its slick warmth. No room for error. Outside, the lighthouse beam turned to him, its golden arc cutting across the chamber in measured revolutions. Gabriel checked his pocket watch, 10 minutes to midnight. He cleared his throat, steeling his nerves, and pressed his back against the narrow wall beside the lens. He would not approach the lamp itself. The entries warned that proximity heightened its hunger. Instead, he would observe the corridor and balcony beyond where the beam illuminated the world. Darkness spun around him, punctuated by rotating arcs of light. Each sweep revealed the storm-tossed sea and jagged rocks beyond the windows. Then the darkness returned, and with it, his own shallow breathing. He stared at the beam's reflection on the metal floor, a golden crescent eternally chasing a counterpart across the stone. Midnight approached with a solemn build. The tower's clock, an ancient mechanism somewhere deep in the structure, struck, once its tone hollow. Gabriel's heart thudded. Then the second stroke, 2, 3, 6, until all 12 notes faded into the lamp's mechanical hum. He took a steadying breath. The threshold had passed. Exactly as the journal predicted, the beam quivered. The light slowed its rotation, trembling in place for a heartbeat before settling back into its steady sweep. The entire chamber felt charged, as though the beam had exhaled a long-held breath. Gabriel gripped the edge of the lens platform, knuckles whitening, and waited. At first, nothing happened, but the beams betrayed rhythm. Then, from the shaft where he had sealed the mirror room, a soft, scuttling sound, something shifting across the stone floor. Gabriel turned his lantern toward the grated hatch that led downward. The scuttling moved closer, following the circular path of the beam. He swallowed, voice dry. "I'm here. Show yourself." His words echoed oddly, as if swallowed by the lantern room's thick walls. The scuttling stopped. The chamber held its breath. Then from the shadows, at the edge of the light's arc, a figure emerged. Something low, and crouched its outline, malformed like a man twisted to fit through a narrow space. It moved in jerks, as though each step was an effort. Its head lifted only when the beam shone directly on it, revealing pale ashen skin, pulled tight over jutting bone. Its eyes glowed with faint luminescence. It crept forward on spindly legs, its arms dragging behind like ragged banners. Gabriel's pulse thundered in his ears. He dared not move the lantern. One wrong motion could snuff it out. He watched frozen as the creature rose to its full height, gaunt, elongated, a corpse shaped by hunger. It lifted a hand, and the beam swept on, but when it returned, the figure had shifted closer. Now, an impossible feat, given the room's dimensions. He pressed himself against the wall. The journal's script burned behind his eyes. Bargains are for the foolish. He realized then that the creature sought his voice. Like a moth drawn to the flame, it hungered for the sound of his breath, his words. It extended its mouth lips, peeling back to a grin that was both pleading and horrifying. A low, rasping sigh escaped its throat, a sound like wind through hollow steel. Gabriel's mind teetered between comprehension and panic. He raised a shaky hand determined to speak, but the words caught in his throat. In that moment, the lamp's mechanism jerked. The beam halted, pointing directly at the creature, bathing it in golden light. It wailed an anguished cry that resonated through the chamber. The floor trembled as though the lighthouse itself had shuddered. The creature's form blurred at the edges, bones cracking as though the light burned through its very essence. Gabriel's chest tightened. He knew what must be done. Recalling the journal's final instruction, offer the warmth or the light will devour you. He swallowed fear and spoke in a low voice, I offer you warmth. He reached for his coat, draped it over the lantern's edge, letting the flame lick its fibers. The scent of scorched wool curled into the chamber. The creature recoiled, hissing, as the fire's warmth glowed through the coat. Its glow dimmed, and it sank to its knees, arms rising as if pleading for release. Gabriel's heart pounded as he held the lantern steady, coat aflame, the light's glow, tempered by the wool's smolder. After a long moment, the creature dissolved into the shadows, its body unraveling like smoke. The beam resumed its rotation, and the room fell silent and still. The coat smoldered, ash drifting to the floor. Gabriel exhaled, voice trembling. Stay away. The lamp's hum was steady once more. He retrieved his extinguished coat, heart hammering, and folded it neatly on the stool. Midnight had passed, and he had faced the hungry thing in the light and survived. As the first hint of dawn tinted the eastern horizon, Gabriel descended the stairs, journal in hand, determined to record what he had witnessed. The lamp's hunger was quelled for now, but he knew the bargain was fragile. He would need to maintain his vigil, heed the journal's warnings, and guard the cursed light until his final night, or vanish like those before him. The dawn light slanted through the crooked windows as Gabriel emerged onto the balcony, each step creaking beneath his boots. The sea below lay muted under the waning storm clouds, waves lapping quietly against the rocky foundation. He cradled the journal in one hand and carried his lantern, still glowing from the previous night's vigil, in the other. His coat, scorched and stiff, hung from a hook in his quarters. He'd leave it there as a grim reminder. Today, however, his focus was on the lamp room, its whispered secrets, and the trail of oil that refused to vanish. He crossed the balcony and re-entered the lamp room. The great Fresnel lens remained silent, its facets gleaming faintly in the morning gloom. Gabriel set the lantern on the stool, then crouched beside the oil reservoir. The dark oil inside was still full, though the previous night's offering had leaked from its cistern and splattered on the metal grating below. He pulled on a pair of leather gloves and pried the access hatch open. A slick of viscous black oil oozed from under the lamp's base, forming rivulets that crept along the floor toward the grated edge. He traced the path with his gloved fingertip. The oil was unnaturally warm, almost hot, and had a metallic tang that stung the back of his throat. Something about its texture felt alive, like a slow heartbeat beneath his glove. As he followed the trail, it narrowed and then pooled at the foot of the pedestal, its surface rippling despite the still air. Gabriel swallowed hard. The creature he had faced last night had departed, but its residue lingered, carrying memory of hunger. He leaned forward and studied the puddle. The journal's entries had warned oil stains appear by the lamp, as though it bleeds. Now he saw why. The black fluid wasn't simply oil, but a byproduct of the lamp's hunger. an essence exuded when the lamp's demands were unmet. He reached for a scrap of cloth from his satchel, intending to wipe it away, but the oil resisted absorption. Instead, it stained the cloth a deeper shade of void. Gabriel dropped the rag, heart hammering, and stepped back. A soft scuff behind him drew his gaze. He spun, raising the lantern, but saw only empty air. The beam caught on the far side of the room, illuminating a smudged handprint on the wall, no larger than his palm, pressed into the stone beside the window. The edges of the print curled inward, as though the fingers had clawed their way out of stone. Gabriel's breath fogged in the cold air. He approached, lantern shaking, and saw that the handprint, like the oil, pulsated with warmth, as though freshly impressed. His mind raced. The previous keeper's journal had described similar marks. A smudged handprint that oozes an uncanny warmth. He lifted a finger to its edge. The warmth crept into his glove, and he recoiled. The print throbbed under his gaze, a silent invitation to touch, or a trap to trap. Gabriel realized that the handprint was no mere stain, but the imprint of something that had reached through the lamp's glow, leaving its mark in the world of the living. He studied the smear, trying to discern a pattern. In the wavering lamplight, it appeared almost rune-like, each fingertip marking a line with faint scratches radiating outward. It was as if some archaic seal had been pressed there. Gabriel tapped his chin. His pencil and paper were back in his quarters. This moment called for evidence. He hurried to the desk, leaving the lantern behind, and fetched his journal pencil stub and a fresh scrap of blotting paper. Returning to the lamp room, he knelt before the print and pressed the blotting paper over it, rubbing gently to capture an impression of the texture. As he worked, the lantern's beam swung across the chamber, and the handprint seemed to shift ever so slightly, its edges writhing like restless ink. Gabriel's heart pounded. He lifted the blotting paper and inspected the faint ridges traced onto its surface, a spiral at the center, the same symbol stamped on the previous keeper's journal, and lines that curved outward like the fluted facets of the Fresnel lens. A sigil of binding, perhaps woven into the very stone of the lighthouse. He tucked the rubbing into the journal and exhaled. A sudden drip echoed from above. Gabriel raised the lantern toward the ceiling. A single drop of oil fell from the lamp's underside onto the metal floor with a dull plink, then another and another, forming a thin trail that led to the central railing. He followed the drips, each one closer than the last, to where he knelt. Gabriel's blood ran cold. He stood back rigid and turned. The beam passed across the railing and revealed another handprint, this one on the opposite wall, larger, smeared in oil, and dark as midnight. He shone the lantern full upon it. The fingers were long and slender, curved like talons, and the palm bore the spiral sigil carved into a living snapshot of pain. Beneath the handprint, small letters were etched into the stone, half hidden by the oil. "Return what is taken." Gabriel read aloud, voice barely a whisper. "Return what is taken. Taken the lamp's light, the souls ensnared by hunger." He swallowed. The lighthouse demanded something stolen, and had marked the spot of its demand. His mind raced back to the journal's final pages, where the previous keeper had scrawled, "I traded warmth for sight, but I kept nothing. Now it wants more." Gabriel closed his eyes. The black oil was the byproduct of these exchanges. He thought of the creature's pleading form, its hunger sated by the scorched coat. But if the lamp's appetite was cyclical, the creature would return until the debt was paid in full. Ahead, the beam slowed, and the lantern's light flickered signals of the lamp's growing impatience. Gabriel set his jaw. He had two choices: abandon the journal's warnings or decipher the lamp's true desire. He crouched and scooped a small dollop of oil from the puddle onto a scrap of wood, watching it bead like ink on parchment. Then he scraped a bit of the stone beneath the larger handprint until a sliver of rock chipped free dusty gray and cold. Dusty gray. He carried both samples back to his quarters, sealing them in glass vials from his satchel and labeling them with shaky pencil. If the lamp's hunger was rooted in some archaic ritual, perhaps a chemical analysis might illuminate the sigil's meaning. Gabriel's training in engineering offered no comfort here. This was not mechanics, but alchemy of the damned. He set the vials on the desk beside his journal and leaned back in the chair. Exhaustion, finally, washing over him. Outside, the lighthouse beam ceased its golden arcs and the world darkened. Gabriel's lantern flickered. In that moment of dimming light, he heard a breath, long, low, and close. He whipped his head toward the door journal, and vials clutched to his chest. The doorway lay empty, but the corridor beyond seemed to shudder. He caught sight of his reflection in the glass vial. A gaunt, haunted silhouette, eyes rimmed with sleepless dread. The sea breeze stuttered through the window, carrying the distant cry of a gull. Gabriel steadied himself. He had uncovered the lamp's black veil, traced the oil's route, and documented the sigil's inscription. Now, he would need answers. The journal's next pages awaited, as did the creature's return. He set the lantern down, knelt by the journal, and wrote a single line in the margin. Debt remains. Research sigil's origin. Outside the lighthouse, beam blinked on once more, its golden pulse slicing the horizon. Gabriel closed the journal and whispered, "I will repay what is taken." Then he gathered his notes and prepared to delve deeper into the lighthouse's cursed mechanics, undaunted, if not unafraid. Moonlight slanted through the narrow windows when Gabriel climbed the spiral stairs, lantern in hand, tracing each worn step back toward the lamp room. The stirring of wind had faded to an almost imperceptible breath, as though the lighthouse itself held its breath in anticipation. He'd spent the evening cross-referencing the sigil rubbing with the journal's cryptic entries, noting each ritual phrase and formula. But time had slipped away. Now, the lantern's wick guttered low, and he sensed the lamp's hunger stirring once more. At the lamp room door, Gabriel paused, pressing an ear against the cold wood. Behind it lay the heart of the lighthouse where light and shadow warred for dominion. He steadied his hand and pushed inside. The great Fresnel lens stood motionless, its glass facets black as a fallen eclipse. Gabriel's lantern cast a narrow beam across the floor's oil-streaked grids. In the stillness, he could almost hear the sigh of spent flame. He carried the small oil lamp to its hook and removed the lantern. The familiar weight in his hand felt hollow tonight. The lamp room's aura tugged at him. Gabriel set his lantern on the floor, then knelt to retrieve the crucible of lamp oil. His gloves brushed against the slick puddle by the pedestal, and he recoiled, remembering the warmth that had almost entranced him. He poured fresh oil carefully into the reservoir, counting each drop. The lamp accepted it with a whisper. Raising the lantern again, he lifted the lamp's mantle and struck a match. The flame caught with a soft hiss, sputtering once before flaring bright. Warm light blossomed inside the lamp's enclosure, illuminating the lens's inner workings with intricate brass gears and polished steel. Gabriel reached for the crank, his hand trembling slightly, and turned it until the mechanism engaged with a reassuring click. The lamp's glow built gradually, a ring of pale fire behind the glass. Gabriel listened as the mechanism wound taut, then released with a soft groan, sending the beam swinging in a gentle arc. Outside the windows, the beam painted distant sea stacks in drifting arcs of silver. Inside, the room felt alive again, as though inhaling that single point of light. But then, a sudden pop, like a gunshot muffled by a heavy cloth. The lamp's flame flickered violently and then hiccuped out, plunging the room into oppressive darkness. Gabriel's lantern swung on its hook, casting a small halo that failed to reach the lens's inner gears. He yanked the lantern down and moved to reignite the lamp heart pounding. Under his gloved fingers, the lamp's housing felt cold, almost clammy. He struck another match. It flared into life, but when he touched it to the mantle, the wick exploded in a puff of gray smoke, and the flame died again. He struck match after match, over a dozen each sputtering and dying in the same instant. The lamp remained stubbornly unlit. Gabriel slammed the matchbox shut and backed away. A low lament rose around him, soft at first, then swelling into a chorus of sorrowful sighs echoing from the walls. The stone rib vault above seemed to weep. Droplets of moisture trickled down like tears. Each lamppost hinge and metal support groaned as though mourning the extinguished light. Gabriel's ears rang with the world's lament. He fumbled the crank, desperate to restart the mechanism, but it spun free in his grasp, clicking uselessly. The beam hung fixed in place, its glass dark, and beyond it lay absolute night. The only light was the lantern's frail glow, which trembled as though threatened by the lament itself. Why, he whispered, "What do you want?" The sighing chorus shaped itself into broken words, drifting through the chamber in a half-heard tongue. Return, light, blood. Gabriel's blood ran cold. He drew the journal from his pocket and flipped frantically to the margins of night 11, where he'd underlined a phrase. Oil-black smudges move against the light. They form words where none existed. They hunger for a voice. He scanned lower and discovered a marginal note in shaky cursive. If flame dies, offer the pulse. His heart thundered. The journal's code had remained consistent warmth voice. Pulse. But pulse, heart, blood. The lamenting walls seemed to confirm it. He pressed a gloved hand to his chest, fingertips brushing his pulse point at the base of his throat. The beat thudded beneath his skin, vibrant and alive. He inhaled, then extended the hand bearing the journal's instruction toward the cold lamp. The lament stilled as though listening. Gabriel steadied himself, slipped off his glove, and with trembling fingers pricked his palm on the journal's sharp corner. A bead of blood welled bright and warm on his skin. He brought his wounded hand close to the lamp's reservoir. The lens's metal caught the lantern's glow, reflecting back the dripping scarlet. The walls exhaled in relief, a soft release of breath. Gabriel closed his eyes, gathering courage, and let a drop of blood fall onto the lamp's reservoir edge. It hissed as it landed, sending a hot scald of sound through the chamber. Immediately, the reservoir drank deeply. Oil and blood, mingling in a dark swirl. The lamenting sighs rose into a crescendo, ringing off the stone in racked sobs. Then silence. The air cleared. Every surface felt suddenly lighter, as though the weight of worlds had lifted. Gabriel waited, pulse pounding. Slowly, the lamp flickered, a pale ember at its core. He struck the crank, and the mechanism engaged with renewed vigor, turning gears that gleamed in the coalescing light. The flame surged upward in a blast of pale fire, illuminating the Fresnel lens until it glowed like a captured sun. The beam sprang to life, rotating in wide sweeps that chased away the darkness. Outside, the sea shimmered under its blade of light. Inside, the walls stood silent and still. Gabriel exhaled warmth flooding his chest. He pressed a hand to the lamp's metal frame, feeling its heat pulse in time with his own heartbeat. For a moment, all remained calm, the lamp's hum steady, the world bathed in light. Then faintly, he heard a whisper this time, laced with gratitude rather than hunger. Keeper, keeper. Gabriel's breath caught. He realized the mirrored echo did not mistake his name this time. It spoke it in relief. He glanced at the journal's margin, where a final scrawl awaited offer the pulse. The lamp shall lament no more until it grows hungry anew. He allowed himself a dark, triumphant smile. The lamp had lamented and had spoken its relief. A new understanding settled in his mind. This was not a one-time bargain, but an ongoing covenant. He would stand at the helm of light and shadow, offering warmth, voice, and pulse to the cursed beacon whenever its hunger flared. He packed the journal away and secured his glove, wiping the lingering blood from his palm on a scrap of cloth. The lamp rotated steadily, casting gold arcs across the chamber. Gabriel stepped back, lantern in hand, and watched the dance of light. Outside the windows, the moon peeked from behind ragged clouds, revealing the calm expanse of sea. In that serene moment, Gabriel sensed that the lighthouse had spoken, released its lament, and entrusted itself to his care. He would remain vigilant, mindful of its needs, and guard the boundary between salvation and oblivion. For only in its light did ships find safe passage, and only through its hunger did darkness learn to speak. Gabriel paused outside the gallery door, breath fogging in the corridor's stale air. The memory of the broken mirror room shards, each reflecting a splintered echo of himself, still haunted his thoughts. Beyond this door lay another looking glass, an antique mirror mounted above the desk, in what appeared to have been the previous keeper's small study. The journal had hinted at it. Above the lamp, a reflection smiles when you weep. He gripped his lantern and steeled his courage, then pushed the door open. The room was cramped and musty, dominated by a wrought iron desk and a tall, narrow mirror hung on the far wall. Faded maps of nearby shipping lanes covered one side, and metal oil cans lined a shelf. Yet all his attention was drawn to the mirror's dark surface mottled with tarnish. The lantern's glow struck it in a dull gleam. Gabriel crossed slowly each step, measured mind racing with the warning he'd scrawled earlier. Haunting reflection awaits. He stood before the mirror and lifted the lantern high. The glass clouded, then cleared, as if breathing out decades of stagnant air. For a moment, he saw only his own drawn face, pale-lined eyes rimmed with exhaustion. He tilted his head. The reflection mirrored him perfectly. Relief crept into his chest until the corner of his eye caught a subtle shift. Gabriel turned sharply. Nothing lay behind him. He risked a glance back at the mirror. His reflection held the same pose, but its smile had grown a fraction wider, lips pulled back to reveal teeth too white, too even. He frowned, lowering the lantern. The reflection's lips parted further. It leaned forward in the glass, though Gabriel had not moved. Shivers coursed through him. He lifted his hand palm outward, and the reflection mimicked him, then paused, its hand still pressed against the glass, creeping inch by inch upward, even as his descended. Gabriel drew back, yanking the lantern closer to his chest. The firelight trembled shadows flickering across the walls. He blinked, and the reflection froze fingers hovering in midair. A hollow chuckle echoed in his mind. Gabriel swallowed. The journal's margin note glared at him. When the glass betrays, test its will. He squared his shoulders and leaned forward. "I'm not your echo," he said, voice low. His reflection's head tilted, though his own did not. Then it smiled fully, eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. Gabriel wrapped the lantern against the desk, sending a glow pulsing across the mirror. The reflection recoiled, but only slightly. Its hand trembled on the glass before flattening to press directly against the mirror's surface. Gabriel watched in horror as a smudge of inky residue appeared on the glass wall, a mock handprint. He set the lantern down and edged closer. "What are you?" he demanded, voice steadier than he felt. The reflection's eyes narrowed, and its grin tightened into a thin slash of malice. It raised an eyebrow, a gesture of mock surprise. Gabriel's heart slammed against his ribs. He raised a trembling finger and poked the glass. The reflection's fingertip met his own, but when he withdrew the glass, felt warm, as though alive. The journal's text surfaced in his mind. "In still waters, the reflection is autonomous." He closed his eyes and took a steadying breath. When he opened them, he shifted left. His reflection did not move. He took another step, then another. The reflection remained fixed. A flicker of triumph touched his chest. He'd discovered its tether, but then the lantern's light dimmed, and in that shadowed moment, the glass flashed. The reflection lunged forward, within the mirror's confines, its fingers clawing at the surface as though seeking purchase beyond the plane. Gabriel stumbled back, lantern swinging, illuminating the room in frantic arcs. The mirror vibrated, webbed with new cracks radiating outward from the center. He snatched up the lantern and hurled it at the mirror. The glass exploded in a cascade of fractured shards that tinkled like brittle laughter. For an instant, he caught sight of something beyond the broken surface. A dark corridor stretching endlessly, lined with countless mirrors, reflecting endless reflections of himself, each one grinning madly, poised to step through. Then the shards fell, and the corridor vanished. Cool air rushed through the gaping hole in the wall. Gabriel pressed a hand to his pounding heart. The lantern lay cracked on the floor, its flame sputtering low. He knelt and lifted it, cradling the broken glass away from the wick until it steadied. In the mirror's place, ragged wooden slats and the rough stone beyond peeked through. He rose, breathing heavily. The study felt emptier, colder, as though the mirror had carried away something intangible when it shattered. He brushed shards from the desk and knelt to collect larger fragments, pressing them into a satchel for safekeeping. Each shard's surface rippled with residue, ghostly echoes trapped in glass. As he worked, a soft glow radiated from a corner behind him. He spun and saw the open journal on the desk pages fanned as though turned by an invisible breeze. He crossed cautiously, lifted the journal, and the page underneath revealed a new scrawl in fresh ink. The reflection waits in pieces. Gabriel's breath caught. The ink looked wet, glistening in the lamplight, even though no pens lay nearby. He flipped the page. Beneath the scrawl lay a hastily drawn diagram, the spiral sigil etched into the stone, overlaid with a shattered mirror's pattern. A note in the margin read, "Channel the shard sight bind the reflection's eyes." Gabriel's mind raced. If the mirror's fragments still held the reflection's power, he could reassemble them into a trap, a lens to imprison the autonomous specter. He gathered the satchel of shards and carried them to his quarters journal clutched tight. The corridor outside was silent. The lighthouse beams swept overhead in regular arcs, oblivious of his plan. In his quarters, he cleared the desk and laid out the fragments around the spiral rubbing. The shards formed an irregular circle, like the lens facets of the Fresnel prism. He traced a finger along the sigil pattern drawn beneath. The shard's edges aligned with the sigil's rays as though intended for this purpose. Gabriel worked swiftly, pressing pieces into place, binding them with strips of leather drawn from his satchel. He murmured the ritual phrase under his breath. In light's reflection, see no more. When the final shard clicked into position, a hush descended. The candle on his desk flared shadows dancing against the walls. Gabriel stepped back. The center of the assemblage glimmered, and then the shard's surfaces darkened, forming a single pulsing eye. It blinked once, twice, and then sealed shut. He exhaled relief, flooding through his chest. The reflection's presence had been caught in these fragments bound by his making. Gabriel closed the journal and tucked it away. He spoke softly to the doll-like eye rest now. It remained still. Outside, the beam's pulse continued casting gold arcs across the horizon. Gabriel shivered, uncertain whether victory truly belonged to him or if another facet of the reflection lingered in the lighthouse's depths. He gathered his bound mirror shards and slipped them into the journal's satchel, ready for the next vigil. He blew out the desk candle and returned to the hall pockets heavy with fragments of darkness, mind alert for any glimmer of silver eyes behind him. The reflection had been captured fragment by fragment, but the lighthouse still whispered with hidden mirrors, waiting to unbind what he had bound. Gabriel paused at the base of the spiral staircase, the echo of his own heartbeat louder in his ears than any footfall. The corridor above lay dark and silent, lit only by the distant sweep of the Fresnel beam through narrow slits in the wall. He had intended to return to the lamp room, perhaps to confirm that his mirror shard trap held, but a new sound stilled his onward march. Faint, deliberate footsteps on a metal grate. The sound was soft at first, a gentle tap that suggested cautious exploration. Then it repeated with precise intervals as though pacing to an unseen metronome. Gabriel's pulse quickened. He recognized the grate, the service walkway that ran beneath the lamp room, its sturdy iron floor plates providing maintenance access to the lamp's mechanism. Whoever or whatever walked upon it was closing in. He raised his lantern, its flickering light carving dancing shapes across the spiral's curve. With each step he took toward the grate, the footsteps ceased. When he halted, they resumed as if trailing him at a constant radius. The game was clear. The intruder would approach only when he retreated, linger when he advanced forever, mirroring his motions. Gabriel swallowed down his mounting tension. He pressed a hand to the cold stone wall and listened. Beneath the rhythm of those footsteps, he discerned another sound softer, like a low hum vibrating through iron and stone. It thrummed against his ribs, tugging at memories of the journal's entries. Something ascends with patience. He peered down at the grated floor. Through the bars, he could see the lamp room's hulking metal supports, coiled cables, and the oil reservoir's circlet of pipes. But no figure stood there, only shadows and the faint glimmer of moving gears. The footsteps paused directly beneath his feet, and he felt the vibration of weight passing under the grate. A flash of remembrance struck him. The previous keeper had written of ceaseless footsteps he could never locate, footsteps that climbed the tower's interior staircase but always felt just out of reach. Gabriel's lips went dry as he realized this was no ordinary intruder. It was the echo of the creature he had bargained with, a remnant bound to the lamp's hunger and his blood pact. He pulled himself away from the grate. "I know you're there," he called softly, voice steady, despite his churning gut. The footsteps halted. A long moment of silence followed, so complete that Gabriel heard his own breath distinct in his ears. Then the footsteps resumed, but ascending, climbing the stone steps toward him. He turned lantern raised and saw nothing but the staircase curling upward into darkness. The steps creaked under the unseen weight, each plate groaning, as if bowing to an invisible traveler. Gabriel's grip tightened on the lantern. He forced himself to climb one cautious step at a time, following the sound. Each landing revealed only an empty corridor, its stone walls bare, except for water streaks and age. At the second landing, he paused again, bracing against the wall. Above him, the footsteps slowed, as though deliberating a path. Then they resumed climbing unevenly, sometimes 2 taps in quick succession, sometimes pausing for a beat before a single, crisp click. Reaching the third landing, Gabriel hesitated beneath a slitted window. The wind had picked up outside, and the beam from the lamp room below swept across the wall in rhythmic arcs, painting it in golden crescents. The footsteps moved past that window, climbing higher. Gabriel followed them, ascending to the final flight that would deliver him into the lamp room itself. At the top, he emerged onto the small antechamber just below the lamp room door. The grate from which the sound had originated lay here, leading back into the mechanical workings. He knelt to press an ear to the bars. Below him, the footsteps crept toward the lamp room threshold. Gabriel rose and set his lantern on a ledge. He tested the lamp room door unlocked as he'd left it and pushed it open. The beam's glow bathed him in shifting light. The pale circle of lantern glow nestled at his feet. He stepped into the room, and the door closed behind him with a gentle click that sounded unnaturally final. The lamp's mechanism hummed softly as it rotated each gear, whispering beneath the weight of oil and blood. Gabriel's eyes darted to the metal grating that framed the lamp's base. There on the grate, small fingerprints had appeared, 12 of them, arranged in a tight ring, as if someone had pressed every finger against the iron in silent vigil. Their edges glowed faintly, residual warmth lingering in the oil. He knelt, raising the lantern to study them. Each print was smaller than his own, slender, almost delicate, but undeniably human. And there beyond them, on the outer edge of the grate, he saw claw marks etched into the metal, shallow but deliberate. Something had ascended through the service walkway, emerging here to mark its presence. A hush settled. Gabriel swallowed and stood. His reflection in the lamp's polished brass housing looked tired, haunted, but resolute. He raised his voice, addressing the empty room. "If you want something," he said, "speak." Silence answered. Then a slow, soft scraping sound metal on stone from above. The beam's rotation swung overhead, illuminating the balcony beyond. Gabriel stepped to the window and peered out. Rain began anew, small beads cascading down the glass. But beneath the downpour, the black cliff face glowed only where the lighthouse beam touched it, and there, perched on a rocky outcrop, ringed by pale surf, stood a figure, tall, skeletal, bent in half, backlit by the lamp's arc. Its head turned, and its hollow eyes fixed on Gabriel through the glass. He felt the beam pause, no longer rotating, freezing on that spot. The figure's mouth opened in a silent scream, and the wind carried its soundless cry across the water. Gabriel's heart threatened to burst. He raced back to the lamp, seized the lantern, and held its glow against the ceiling. The beam resumed sweeping past the window, past the ledge, and illuminated the cliff once more. The figure had vanished. Only the slick rocks and swirling white foam remained. He rushed to the grate, set the lantern on its edge, and leaned over. The walkway beneath was empty, but he caught sight of 2 footprints imprinted in oil, one of heavy, booted tread, and another slippered and small. The second print he recognized from his lamproom floor, his own slippered footprint from when he had knelt in vigil. The heavier boot print was new. Gabriel exhaled, steeling himself. He wiped the oil from his hands and examined the prints. The heavier print's toe pointed toward the ladder leading up to the lamp housings. He looked up. Above him, beyond the lens, the maintenance hatch sat slightly ajar. He climbed onto the grate and followed the sole of the footprint to the ladder. Lantern in hand, he ascended each rung, bringing him closer to where the lamp's mechanics nestled above the lens. He reached the hatch and paused, listening. No footsteps now, only the soft drip of oil from the dripping reservoir. Shaking, he pried the hatch open and slid through into a cramped compartment filled with coiled cables and pulleys. The beam's glow filtered through the lens below, painting the space in muted gold. As he lowered himself, his lantern chimed against metal, and he caught sight of a smear of oil on the bulkhead. He traced it, a slender hand's palm thumb and fingers pressed into steel. He turned and saw a dark shape crouched in the recesses behind the machinery, its silhouette defined by the rotating lens's backlight. The creature's head lifted. Hollow eyes glowed as they met his. It drew itself to standing, tall, ragged, but more solid here, more corporeal than the half-shapes he'd faced before. Gabriel's breath hitched. The creature mimicked his stance, emerging fully into the compartment. The latter cast crisscross shadows across its ashen skin. It raised its head and spoke, voice at last, unfettered by the lamp's hunger, bearer of the pulse. Gabriel swallowed, voice steady, despite his fear. "I tend the light." The creature took a step forward, its foot silent on the metal floor. "And yet your footsteps falter," it observed. "Return what is taken." Gabriel's jaw clenched. He realized then that the footprints were not invitations, but warnings, the creature tracking his duty. He raised the lantern high. "What do you want?" The creature's features twisted into something like sorrow. "Completion," it whispered. "You offered warmth. You offered voice. You offered pulse. Now, Offer sight. Gabriel frowned uncertain. Sight. The creature nodded, once brittle bones clicking. Show me the world beyond. Gabriel's mind raced. The lamp's purpose was to cast light far into the night, to offer sight to ships at sea. The lamp's hunger had demanded sacrifices to maintain that gift. The creature, bound to the lamp's will, now sought the light's source to see through his eyes. He lowered the lantern and nodded. Very well. He pried open the reservoir's service panel and offered the creature a glimpse inside, then raised his lantern so the creature could peer fully into the lantern room beyond. The beam's cyclopean sweep revealed the sleeping world, distant fishing boats drifting in the harbor, each illuminated in fleeting slashes. The creature inhaled, absorbing the vision. Its form shimmered the edges of its body, filling out into something almost human. When the beam completed its rotation, Gabriel closed the reservoir and met the creature's gaze. Sufficient. The creature inclined its head gratefully. Then its form blurred, dissolving into motes of shadow that drifted back through the hatch and vanished into the walkway below. Gabriel exhaled, heart pounding, but resolute. The lamp room felt colder now, but the reservoir gleamed bright, satisfied. He climbed down, sealing the hatch behind him. The lamp's beam resumed its steady pulse, carving golden arcs across the storm-dark sea. Gabriel descended the spiral stairs to his quarters, mind racing with the terms of his covenant warmth voice, pulse, sight, each offering a debt that bound him to the lighthouse's will. But now he understood the shape of this servitude, and he would keep his watch, no matter the footsteps that traced his path. Gabriel emerged from the spiral staircase into the lamp room antechamber, the weight of the lighthouse's covenants pressing on his shoulders like Atlas's burden. In his satchel lay the bound mirror shards, the sigil rubbing, and the vials of black oil and chipped stone tokens of his study. Yet, as he crossed the threshold into the lantern chamber, he sensed that knowledge alone would not suffice. The lamp's hunger had evolved, its demands growing more complex with each offering. Tonight, he would probe the lantern's core and uncover the secret it guarded. He set the lantern on the stool and drew the journal from his coat pocket, flipping to the final unnumbered page, a blank sheet he'd reserved for his own observations. He paused, pen poised, and listened. The lamp's mechanism hummed with measured breath gears turning behind the Fresnel lens. The beam's golden sweep glided across the sea, and the tower walls as reliable as gravity itself. Yet within the chamber, shadows pooled in hidden corners, coalescing into areas the beam could not touch. Gabriel knelt beside the reservoir and pried off the brass cap covering the oil intake valve. The surface gleamed in the lantern's glow. He peered inside, noting the depth of oil and the faint sheen of blood he had offered. He closed his eyes, recalling the creature's final whisper, completion, sight, and he realized that this valve, this entry point, was more than a fuel supply. It was the lamp's throat, the vessel's wound through which it drank. If he could understand its anatomy, perhaps he could bind it more effectively. He reached into his satchel and withdrew the small vial of collected oil. Its texture was thick, almost coagulated. He unscrewed the cap and poured a single drop onto a scrap of blotter, lifting it to his nose. The scent was acrid, but layered beneath. That was a faint trace of salt and ozone echoes of the sea and storm. He jotted notes in the journal's margin. Oil contains trace sea minerals. Connection to the abyss. Lamp, fed by both blood. blood and salt. A sudden clink drew his attention. He looked up to see one of the mirror shards inadvertently flicked from his satchel, reflecting a stray beam of the lantern into a dark alcove near the reservoir's pipes. Where the light danced, he saw movement, a fine web of cobwebs blanketing the iron, their strands shimmering with oily residue. At the center of the web, a small, pale spider scuttled away, vanishing into a seam between plates. Gabriel frowned. The journal had never mentioned webs or creatures beyond the hungry wraith. He rose and swept his lantern over the pipes, uncovering more cobwebs and the glimmer of tiny droplets black as pitch clinging to their strands. The pattern reminded him of the mirror diagram, spokes radiating from a hub. The lamp room's architecture mirrored that sigil pattern too. Pipes branching like spokes gears at the center and the lens as the capstone. He traced a finger along one pipe, feeling faint vibrations like the pulse in the oil. The spin of the gear train translated to a heartbeat here. Gabriel's mind snapped to the journal's page. Bind the heart, and the eye sees no more. The heart must be the central gearbox, the locus of the lamp's will. If he could bind that heart, as he had bound the reflection, perhaps he could draw the hunger away from those who looked upon the light. He moved to the grated walkway, encircling the lamp's base. Stepping out onto the metal, the spider webs brushed his coat as he passed. He squinted into the gloom beneath the lens, rows of interlocking gears, polished brass teeth, meshing with steel cogs. At the center stood a cylindrical chamber. The oil pump, its surface inscribed with faint runes that glowed only when the lantern's beam aligned just so. Gabriel tipped the journal open to a page he'd flagged with red ink. A fragment from Night 16, Heart of the Beacon, which he had scrawled himself. The pump's pulse is the lamp's life. To still the hunger, bind the pulse. He set the journal on the walkway guardrail and knelt beside the pump lantern held close. The runes were etched into the brass, the spiral sigil repeated, but interlaced with small triangular markings he hadn't noticed before. He raised a shard of the bound mirror and held it against the pump's flank. The shard's silvered face caught the lantern's glow and reflected it back into a rune that lay adjacent to the spiral. As the light intersected the marking, it flared briefly like a starburst, and the runes trembled. Gabriel's pulse quickened. The mirror shard, when properly positioned, could refract the lamp's own light into its wound. He pressed the shard into place, fitting its jagged edges alongside the rune until it clicked into an indentation he hadn't known existed. Instantly, the pump's hum deepened and the lamp's beam flickered. Gabriel braced himself as the runes glowed with molten intensity. The pulsating energy coursed through the pump's gears and into the shard, sending a shiver up his arm. For a heartbeat, the lamp room resounded with a resonance unlike any he'd heard, a throbbing note that felt both joyous and anguished. Then the shard shattered cracks, spider-webbing out into the brass housing. The pump's song stilled abruptly, and the lamp's beam wavered before drifting to a halt fixed on the empty horizon. Darkness flooded the chamber. Gabriel's lantern was his only light now. He straightened, heart hammering, and inspected the shattered shard lodged in the pump. Embedded within the brass, it glimmered faintly, its fractured surface now etched into the metal as if fused. The runes, once alive, were now silent. He exhaled, gathering his nerve. With a hand to his chest, He squeezed his journal-laden satchel, recalling the covenant's terms. He'd offered warmth, voice, pulse, sight. And now, he'd offered the fragment of light itself, binding the lamp's heart with its own reflection. The lamp had accepted, albeit violently. A faint click drew his gaze upward. Gabriel looked to see the reservoir's level drop slightly oil and blood, siphoning back into the pump's chamber. The lantern's beam remained still, but he sensed a shift. The lamp's hunger was sated for now. The hush in the chamber felt lighter, as though a heavy weight had been lifted. He descended from the walkway, stepping carefully over spider webs, glinting with black droplets. At the ladder's base, he paused and ran a hand over his coat. A fine tremor ran through the tower as the lamp's mechanism reset itself, moving gears, clicking back into place. Outside, the beam had not resumed yet. The sea beyond was framed in the lantern's glow, dampened but steady. Gabriel returned to the journal on the stool and wrote one final note, heart-bound by broken reflection. Hunger abates. He closed the journal and tucked it back into his satchel. The lantern's glow trembled as he retrieved it, and he felt a soft pulse echo in its bass resonance from the lamp's own halted song. He exhaled, hands shaking, and stepped out of the lamp room into the corridor. The lighthouse felt different, its stones less oppressive, its shadows less watchful. Yet he knew this peace would not last indefinitely. Each covenant bound him tighter to the cursed beacon. But now, he carried not only warnings, but the knowledge of how to bind its heart when hunger returned. As the first gray light of pre-dawn crept into the corridors, Gabriel descended the spiral stairs, satchel heavy with broken glass and inked pages. In the hall, silvery beams fractured across the floor from the beam's halted sweep. He paused, watching the frozen light like a trapped wave. Then he stepped aside, letting its arc roll past and fade into obscurity. He reached his quarters and closed the door behind him. The lamp room's echo lingered in his bones, but he felt a measure of triumph. Tonight, he had bound the heart of the beacon. Tomorrow, he would guard its pulse, and if the lamp hungered again, he would meet it once more with reflection, blood, and relentless resolve. Gabriel awoke with a start, the brittle snap of broken glass echoing in his mind. The candle on his bedside table had guttered low constellations of wax droplets pooling at its base. Outside, the lighthouse beam, miraculously restored, swept past his window with its familiar pulse. He bolted upright, heart hammering, and realized it was past the hour he usually maintained his vigil. The lamp room's demands had shifted. He felt compelled to confront the next entry in the journal, where the previous keeper's words had betrayed his descent into madness. Clutching the leather-bound volume, Gabriel washed his face at the basin and donned his coat. The corridors lay empty and silent, each step toward the lamp room ringing out in crisp clarity. He carried a fresh lantern, its wick trimmed and oil replenished, and felt its weight as both comfort and burden. The journal's pages seemed to throb under his fingers, urging him onward to the entry marked Night 12 Keeper's Torment. At the lamp room door, Gabriel paused, drawing strength from the familiar iron handle. He opened it and stepped inside. The Fresnel lens rotated in measured sweeps, casting pools of golden light that chased away the corners of shadow. Gabriel set his lantern on the stool beside the reservoir and flipped the journal open to the designated page. Under the heading, the cramped handwriting bled across the page. The lantern's glow betrays me. Visions drift across the beam, shadows from my own mind. I see all his face in every glow, whispering lines I cannot unhear. Gabriel exhaled. He remembered nights when through the lens he had glimpsed shapes at the horizon, misread fishing boats drifting debris, but none that whispered. He sat on the stone floor, lantern propped against his knee, and read on. I tried to journal my fear, but the words rearranged themselves, spelling names I never wrote. The oil ran black with dread, and I could not look away. His throat tightened. The entry above was marked with a small blood stain, rust-colored and smeared. Gabriel touched the blot, recoiling when he felt its gritty texture. He turned another page. My reflection mocks me. Still fractured shards show my screams, yet the mirror's eye is empty. It beckons me to join it, to leap and shatter the walls of this tower. He glanced up at the beam's steady rotation. The journal's phrases felt alive, as though they pulsed with a spectral heartbeat. Gabriel stood, lantern held high, and approached the Fresnel lens. The brass support pillars glittered in the glow. Behind them, the horizon lay calm. He clenched his jaw, determined not to succumb to the same illusions. Yet no sooner had he taken one step than the beam's arc slowed. The mechanism groaned and the lens paused, pointing not at the sea, but directly into the chamber. The glow intensified, bathing him head to toe in golden light. Gabriel's breath caught. In that glare, the walls behind him darkened, and a shape coalesced in the corner, a silhouette so familiar it froze his limbs. He recognized the figure instantly. The previous keeper, hunched and gaunt eyes wild. His coat hung in ragged strips, and his face was twisted in anguish. He stood motionless, staring at Gabriel with a hollow intensity. Gabriel raised the lantern. The figure flickered and stepped closer, though he made no sound. The journal's words rushed back. I see his face in every glow, whispering lines I cannot unhear. Gabriel swallowed and addressed the vision. What do you want? His voice trembled. The figure's lips moved, and Gabriel heard a faint hiss whispering through the lens's brass frame. He pressed his hand to the Fresnel's support pillars, trying to steady himself. The words came through not audibly. Finish what I could not. The vision pointed at the journal held in Gabriel's belt. Gabriel reached for it. The pages fluttered on their own. He opened to the next entry, the one left blank by the previous keeper, but now scrawled in fresh, spidery ink. Night 12, Keeper's Torment. I must become the lamp. To bind the hunger, I must feed it myself. Flesh to flame, blood to lens, my body dissolves into light. Gabriel's blood ran cold. The figure stepped closer, each footfall silent on the stone. Gabriel realized the spectral keeper sought to borrow his body to complete a ritual of self-immolation. He gripped the journal with both hands and whispered, "No." Behind him, the beam cut him off from even thinking of retreat. The rotating segments slowed further until the lens hung motionless, its glass facets radiating heat. The chamber's temperature rose. The air felt thick, suffocating. Gabriel's lantern guttered, fighting the glare. The journal's pages fluttered violently, as though caught in a storm. He forced himself to read the final lines of the fresh entry. The flame consumes my flesh, and I become the beacon. My soul spreads across the sea, guiding ships, but I am lost. A sob caught in Gabriel's throat. He slammed the journal shut and hurled it across the room. The beam stuttered and resumed its steady arc, directing its light back out to sea. The oppressive heat vanished. A cool hush settled. The spectral keeper vanished, with the shift leaving only empty air and the low hum of gears. Gabriel stumbled to the journal, retrieving it as though it might absolve him. He leafed to the page before the fresh entry where the previous keeper had left off and found a marginal note in cramped handwriting break the cycle, refuse the final gift. Beneath a single word, survive. His heart pounded. The previous keeper's madness had peaked in a fatal act, offering himself wholly to the lamp. The note's command was clear: do not follow. Gabriel exhaled, steadying himself. He set the journal on the stool and turned to the reservoir, checking that the oil and blood mixture remained within safe levels. If the lamp's hunger again demanded flesh, he would deny it, but the chamber held its breath. Gabriel raised the lantern and moved to the mirror shard trap stored in his satchel. He retrieved the small circle of bound shards and arranged them on the desk. The mirror's pulsing eye lay dormant, its power intact. He stared into the shards, recalling how he had bound that autonomy. Perhaps he could bind the keeper's spirit too, using their own reflection against them. He placed the splintered circle before the Fresnel lens, positioning it so the beam passed through the shards. The eye flickered to life, shimmering with pale light. Gabriel braced himself as the shards refracted the lamp's beam back onto the chamber walls, amplifying every shadow. The walls, stained by oil and tears, seemed to ripple with movement. From the golden wash emerged the keening wail of the keeper's ghost, a lament that scraped at Gabriel's mind. He closed his eyes, pressing a fist to his chest. Then, with deliberate calm, he intoned the ritual phrase scrawled beneath, "Bound by reflection, seek no host." The shards glowed, capturing the wail in shimmering prisms. The lament fragmented, splintering into echoes that rattled the walls. Gabriel held his ground voice firm. The ghost pressed against the circle, its hand reaching through the shards, but each finger met jagged edge and recoiled. The shriek peaked, then fractured into silence. The shards dimmed, and in a final flash, extinguished the ghostly presence. The chamber was still. Only the beam's gentle rotation cut through the hush. Gabriel exhaled, knees weakening, and retrieved the shards. He slipped them back into his satchel and closed the journal. In the margin of the fresh entry, he wrote, "Keeper's spirit-bound cycle broken." He left the lamp room, stepping onto the spiral stairs with shaky resolve. At each landing, the corridors lay peaceful, free of phantom footsteps and mocking echoes. By the time he reached his quarters, dawn had begun to suffuse the hall with pale light. Gabriel closed the door journal and shards at his side and allowed himself a moment of weary triumph. He had confronted the tormented keeper's ghost and refused the final tragic bargain. Gabriel shut the lamp room door behind him and crossed to the radio console, tucked into a recessed alcove along the far wall. The morning's first light filtered through the slitted windows, but the storm's gray remnants lingered on the horizon, drifting like ghosts across the sea. He set his lantern on the floor, its warm glow paling beside the Fresnel beam's soft arcs. Today's entry in the journal, untouched until now, awaited him under the heading Vanishing Signal. He brushed a hand over the dusty radio dial and flicked the power switch. The console crackled to life, sending arcs of static rippling through the chamber. Gabriel exhaled, adjusting the frequency to the marine distress channel. His knuckles whitened on the tuning knob as he waited for the familiar hiss and the distant voices of passing ships. Nothing. He tapped the microphone button. "This is Keeper Gabriel Montero of Beacon Point Lighthouse. We have no shore power, no fuel deliveries, and the light's mechanism is specialized. Please acknowledge. Over." His voice sounded tinny, swallowed by static. Silence. The speaker emitted only a low hum. Gabriel's jaw clenched. He pressed again, edging the knob, scanning frequencies up and down. Each click brought only static. No crack of response, no distant reply. He continued, "Mayday. Mayday. This is Beacon Point. Over." Still nothing. Gabriel's heart pounded. He knelt to inspect the logbook lying beneath the radio. Its pages, yellowed and filled with neat dated entries. He opened to the current date today, scanned the log entries for oil levels, weather observations, passing vessels noted at dawn. At the bottom, a blank space awaited his own entry. He lifted the pen and clicked it, but the ink cartridge sputtered empty. He replaced it with a spare from the desk drawer and began to record attempted radio contact. No response. Console operational. Emergency. As he wrote, the console crackled once, twice, like the faint echo of a distant voice. Gabriel paused, pen hovering. He set the pen aside and pressed his ear to the speaker. Under the static, he thought he heard a whisper. "Montero." His breath caught. He cleared his throat and spoke into the microphone again. "Who's there?" There was no reply, only the hiss of radio static, punctuated by a single sharp beep on the meter. Gabriel rose and aimed the lantern at the frequency readout. The dial previously locked at the distress channel now spun erratically, the needle flicking across several channels at once, before settling on an empty notch between frequencies. He reached out to steady the knob, but it spun again, as though guided by an unseen hand. He yanked it back to the distress frequency and held it firmly. The meter read 0000, no signal. A chill coiled through his spine. He realized the console ought to have some ambient chatter. Fishermen broadcasting positions, Coast Guard patrols checking in. The complete absence of any traffic felt deliberate. He grabbed the radio handbook and flipped to the troubleshooting section. Under signal interference, he found instructions to check the input voltage and ground connection. He traced cables behind the console and confirmed the power feed from the lamp room's generator. The generator hummed as usual, feeding oil to flame, but its output to the radio line read 0 volts. Gabriel frowned. He wiggled the power cable and tested the ground lug with a small screwdriver. Everything appeared intact. He tapped the console's casing. Under his fingertips, the metal panel gave a hollow ring. He glanced at the journal's margin, where he had copied the entry. He attempts to send an SOS with the radio only to find the message erased from the log. His chest tightened. He returned to the logbook, ran his finger down the morning's entry, and saw that his own note, the one he'd just written, had vanished. The page was blank, save for the older entries. The pen lay uncapped on the desk, ink glistening at the nib untouched. Gabriel's breath shuddered. He snapped his head toward the console, and there in the small digital display, where he'd just seen the date and time, was the message, "No entries to display." He staggered back. His reflection in the radio's glass meter flickered first his own pale face, then a second face behind him. Gaunter eyes, hollow. He spun. The lantern caught nothing behind him. When he looked back, the radio display blinked empty once more. He pressed his fingertip to the glass. It cooled beneath his touch. but the display remained blank. Gabriel's mind raced. If the radio's records could be erased and his calls silenced, then the lighthouse's malevolent influence extended beyond the lamp. It could intercept any cry for help. He grabbed the console and slammed the casing shut, severing its power, and hurried to the nearby desk. He retrieved a handheld whistle and clipped it to his coat. If all else failed, he would ascend the tower during daylight and signal passing ships the old-fashioned way. But before he could move, the radio console crackled again, the static coalescing into the faintest whisper. Your voice. Lost. Gabriel's skin crawled. He pointed his lantern at the dial. It spun slowly, the needle sweeping to an unmarked frequency. He steadied it on that mark. The voice returned clearer now, though still laced with interference. They come. They wait. Gabriel swallowed hard. He tapped the microphone. Identify yourself. Only static answered. The whisper persisted. The signal vanishes, as does the keeper. His heart thundered. The journal's margin entry on vanishing signals pulsed in his memory. Radio calls erased. No one hears your plea. He realized the radio had never been broken. It had been rendered useless by the same force that thirsted at the lamp's core. The lighthouse's hunger had learned to devour sound. Determined, Gabriel grabbed the amateur radio transmitter stored in the desk drawer, a smaller unit intended for backup. He connected it to his portable battery pack, powered it on, and keyed the microphone. He adjusted the frequency to the emergency channel and spoke. This is Gabriel Montero, keeper at Beacon Point. Light is operational. Storm aftermath. Status report. His voice crackled into the microphone. He listened, heart-racing static. He repeated the call, pressing his palm to the antenna in frustration. Still nothing. The handheld radio emitted a low beep, then displayed a single word on its tiny screen: offline. Gabriel stared in disbelief. His calls, his logs, even his backups were being nullified. He slammed the radio down and sank into the chair, lantern light wobbling across the walls. The lighthouse had severed his lifeline to the world. A sudden knock on the door startled him. The labored rapping echoed in the alcove. Gabriel's pulse spiked. He grabbed his lantern and whip-cracked the door open. Outside lay only the narrow corridor, empty and silent. No footprints, no figure. He closed the door, bolting it firmly. He pressed his back against the wood heart pounding. The knocks resumed, softer, now insistent. Keeper, keeper. The voice overlapped with the knocking, merging into a dissonant plea. Gabriel's chest tightened. He realized that the vanishing signal was not merely technological, it was personal. The lighthouse demanded isolation. It wanted him cut off from aid so that its hunger might be met without disturbance. He exhaled, mind racing. He fetched the journal and flipped to the margin where he jotted strategies for vanishing signals rely on mirror trap, force reflections to transmit. He closed his eyes and recalled how the mirror shards had captured the keeper's ghost. Perhaps a similar trick could force his distress calls back to him, to bind the radio's output to its own reflection, so that any message erased would echo back into the console unvanishable. Gabriel rose, lantern in hand, and crossed to the mirror shard circle on the desk. He arranged it around the radio's speaker grill shards angling inward. Steadying his breath, he powered up the console once more. The static hissed, and he heard the faintest echo of his own voice. This is Keeper Montero. The shards glimmered, and the echo fractured into multiple spectral voices, each repeating his distress call. The radiometer leapt to life, the needle dancing across the scale. Gabriel keyed the microphone, beacon point, to all stations. Mayday, Mayday. This time the shards captured and reflected his voice, amplifying it within the console's circuitry. A burst of static exploded from the speaker, then coalesced into a clear tone, an answering signal. Gabriel's blood thundered as he heard crackling voices. Beacon point. This is MV Serenity. Go ahead, Keeper Montero. Over. Relief surged through him. He responded at once. MV Serenity. Take course to Beacon Point. Serious structural damage reported. Over. Acknowledged. ETA 10 minutes. Over and out. Gabriel collapsed into the chair lantern's glow, steady once more. The console's display returned to normal, listing incoming vessels and weather conditions. His own logbook lay open its pages, ready for new entries. The radio's hiss was gone, replaced by the gentle hum of the speaker. He exhaled sweat beading on his brow. The lighthouse's vanishing signal had been overcome, captured, and reflected back through the mirror shard's prism. His cry for help no longer vanished into the void. He closed the console's casing and snapped off the power switch, ensuring the shards remained in place until the MV Serenity arrived. Stepping back, Gabriel allowed himself a moment of quiet triumph. The radio tower might have tried to erase his voice, but the power of reflection and his own ingenuity had restored his link to the world. As the beam swept past the radio console in golden arcs, Gabriel prepared to guide the approaching ship into the harbor, ensuring that no signal, no matter how hungry, could ever vanish without trace again. Twilight seeped into the tower's corridors like ink dissolving in water, staining the stone walls in bruised purples and shadows that stretched unnaturally long. Gabriel stepped from his quarters into the hall, lantern in hand, and felt the lighthouse exhale around him, its pulse slowing now that daylight dwindled. The bound mirror shards in his satchel tapped softly against the leather, their captured reflections ready should the need arise. Tonight, the journal's next command awaited navigate the shifting tower. Reality bends at dusk. He ascended the spiral staircase, 2 flights pausing at each landing to orient himself. Normally, he could map the tower blindfolded, but this evening, the walls seemed to shift. What had been a solid arch now sagged, and the landing itself felt skewed as though one side lay lower than the other. Gabriel steadied the lantern, its glow revealing a narrow corridor that should have led to storage but stood now before the locked keeper's study door. Confusion flickered through his mind. The study door was 2 flights higher. He tugged at the handle. It turned easily, creaking open to reveal only darkness. Heart racing. Gabriel peered into the room. Bookshelves lined the walls, but the titles were wrong, strange languages he did not recognize. The desk lay overturned scraps of paper littering the floor, and shards of broken glass glinted among them. Pieces of mirror he hadn't yet broken. He swallowed, stepping forward, and a low hum began like distant voices chanting in unison. The shards trembled in his satchel as if alive. He raised his lantern, casting its beam over the papers, each bearing a single word, here, there, elsewhere. The fragments assembled themselves in his thoughts into a phrase: corridor unreality. Gabriel backed out and closed the door. Behind him, the handle snapped as though relocked by unseen hands. He pressed his palm to the cool wood breath shallow. The corridor beyond had changed too. its stone bricks rearranged into a mosaic pattern he had never seen spiraling toward a dull red glow at the far end. He realized with a jolt that he stood not 2 floors below the lamp room, but at its base. Yet the red glow was not from oil or flame, but from a pulsing light in a tiny niche he'd never noticed before. Guided by necessity, Gabriel advanced. Each step warped the corridor. The floor sloped upward, then dipped into a hollow. The walls curved inward until he felt squeezed. The ceiling sagged to brush his head. The lantern beam flickered, fighting an unseen wind that buffeted its flame from all directions. Shadows stretched into shapes, twisted silhouettes that lurched just at the edge of sight. As he neared the red glow, the chanting ceased, replaced by a single voice, whispering his name in a dozen tones at once. The niche housed a small iron box, emblazoned with the spiral sigil, and covered in the same triangular runes he had bound at the lamp's heart. The lid quivered as though breathing. Gabriel's satchel clicked one of the mirror shards nudging his side. He knelt and set the lantern on the floor, studying the box. A faint perfume of oil and something sharper, like blood, drifted from its seams. He traced the runes with a finger. They pulsed softly in response. Above the runes, an inscription arced in archaic script. When paths diverge, choose the path home. Gabriel exhaled, recalling the journal's annotations on twilight transformation. The tower would attempt to trap him in loops of hallways until he lost direction forever. He opened the box. Inside lay a small brass compass, its needle spinning violently, never settling. A folded scrap of paper rested beneath a single line in the previous keeper's hand. True north lies within. Gabriel frowned, sitting back on his heels. The lantern's glow caught the compass's face, and for a moment the needle aligned, pointing not to the tower's true north, but toward the lamp room above. Gripping the box, he rose and set off corridors shifting beneath his feet. He held the compass before him. Its steady direction guided him upward as hallways dissolved into twisting passages and doors led to empty walls. Following the needle, he ascended flights of stairs that turned in on themselves, each landing more disorienting than the last. The compass never wavered, always pointing to the lamp room, the heart of his covenant. At last, Gabriel emerged into familiar territory, the corridor just below the lantern chamber. The compass spun once, then froze its face dead straight toward the lamp room door. He exhaled, legs trembling, and advanced. The anomalous mosaic walls and red glow were gone. Candle sconces stood where the niche had been. Reality had reasserted itself. He crossed the threshold into the lamp room, lantern raised, and the compass fell still in his palm. The Fresnel lens rotated its golden arcs, calm and steady. Gabriel placed the compass on the desk beside the scarred journal and stared as its needle finally found rest. True north had been within him, his resolve, and the compass had guided him by that inner certainty. As the last vestiges of twilight bled from the windows, Gabriel sank to the floor, exhaustion pulling at his bones. The tower had tested him, twisting its corridors like a labyrinth of nightmares, but he had found his way. He gathered the mirror-bound shards, vials, and journal, and rested his back against the cool stone. The lamp room's hum lulled him toward calm. Outside, the beam swept across the sea, a beacon of safety and dread intertwined. Within, Gabriel closed his eyes, breathing evenly. He had faced the lighthouse's morphing corridors and emerged unlost. Dawn still lay hours away, but for the first time since his arrival, he felt certain that no matter how reality bent, he could always find his path back to the light. Gabriel clasped the journal under his arm as the sun's last ember of light surrendered to night. The corridor beyond the lamp room door rippled in the fading glow stone bricks, seeming to stretch and contract like breathed sighs. He paused, lantern illuminating the threshold, and felt the pulse of the lighthouse thrum against his chest, an insistent reminder that with darkness, its will grew strongest. He stepped into the hall and found the walls shifted. Archways, where none had stood, yawned wide, leading into narrow passages impossibly elongated. The floor sloped at odd angles, as though the tower itself bent beneath the weight of its own curse. Gabriel forced his feet forward, lantern high, guiding him through the twisting arteries of the lighthouse. The journal fluttered in his grip, pages marked with margin notes. Twilight, transformation corridors become living veins. He reached into his coat pocket, drawing the sigil rubbing still affixed to a scrap of blotting paper. He pressed it to the nearest wall. The spiral imprint pulsed faintly in the lantern's light, and the stone rejected it, its surface oozing moisture as though sweating fear. Gabriel shivered, but pressed on, trusting the binding to repel the tower's distortions long enough to find his way. A low keening rose around him, as though the stone itself lamented the dying day. He recognized the wail from the mirror trap's fracture echoes of trapped reflections seeking release. At a sharp turn, the corridor bent unexpectedly, blending into another hallway lined with shuttered windows. Through one slit, he glimpsed the sea, its black surface dotted with the gleams of distant vessels guided by his beam. For a moment, he allowed pride to ease his dread. The light persisted unwavering. Then the passage ahead flickered with movement. Shadows detached from the walls, coalescing into shapes that stalked the periphery of his lantern's glow. Gabriel inhaled, recalling the ritual phrase, "In light's reflection, see no more." He removed a mirror shard from his satchel and angled it so the lantern's beam skimmed along the wall opposite the shadows. In the shard's gleam, the shapes recoiled and dissolved into smoke. He advanced, shard-raised lantern steady, but the corridor behind him whispered with shifting stone. He rounded another bend and entered a chamber he did not recognize, a circular room with a domed ceiling. At its center stood a key of iron poles that once supported scaffolding, now repurposed into a cage-like structure. Inside, the remnants of the previous keeper's traps lay scattered fragments of mirror lengths of leather cord and tattered scraps of cloth. Gabriel surveyed the scene with grim understanding. Here, the keeper had attempted to bind the tower's will and failed. His own victories felt brittle by comparison. A gust of unseen wind snuffed the lantern, plunging Gabriel into midnight black. He struck a match, its glow precarious, and saw that the cage's bars had shifted. They now formed the spiral sigil from his journal, distorted and wicked. The damp air pressed in, and he felt a weight upon his chest, as though gravity itself bent under the island's isolation. He lit the lantern again and held it aloft. The spiral cage glowed in the flickering light, and Gabriel realized the bars were etched with tiny runes, too small to see until illuminated. He knelt to study one, the rune for change repeated in concentric circles. The cage was a glyph of transformation, designed to warp any who entered. Gritting his teeth, Gabriel reached into his satchel and withdrew the compass that had guided him true. He pressed it against one of the bars. The needle, which had long since fallen silent, sprang to life, spinning wildly before locking onto a fixed direction toward the dome's apex. He followed the needle's guidance, stepping through the cage and climbing the few stone steps that led to a hatch in the ceiling. As he ascended, the runes along the bars glowed, and the stone beneath his boots throbbed with restless energy. The hatch gave way under his hand, and he emerged onto a narrow walkway, encircling the lantern chamber from above. Here the Faraday cage of the tower's stone met the open sky, and Gabriel inhaled a lungful of salt-tinged air. Above him, storm clouds gathered like spectators for a final act, and he knew the light's hunger would soon crescendo. He secured the hatch behind him and tightened his grip on the compass. The journal's margin phrase ticked in his mind: "Dusk bends reality. Only the true north endures." He pressed the compass to his chest, feeling its steady pulse echo his own heartbeat. Then, without hesitation, he stepped onto the narrow girder that spanned across the chamber's rim. Below, the Fresnel lens rotated in luminous arcs, a living eye scanning the night. Shadows cast by the light's beams stretched into the darkness, creating temporary sanctuaries. Gabriel moved along the girder lantern and compass, guiding him over yawning drops and rusty support beams. The wind rasped through the iron grating, tugging at his coat and testing his balance. Halfway around, he saw a blur of motion beneath the lantern's glow. A patch of oil-black handprints had appeared on the walkway's underside, their fingers splayed as though marking a path. Gabriel recalled the larger handprint by the lamp room window and the command it bore: "Return what is taken." The oil bleeding through the grating signified the lamp's memory, the record of every offering he had made. Here it asked for final atonement. He closed his eyes, recalling each covenant warmth voice: pulse, sight, reflection, signal. Tonight, reality itself had bent at the twilight's edge, and the lighthouse had tested him beyond every threshold. The final debt remained unfulfilled. Gabriel exhaled, steeling himself, and lowered the lantern to where the handprints marked the beam's path. He pressed the compass to the oily marks, and the needle wavered before pointing toward the heart of the lamp room below. In that moment, he understood the lighthouse's true desire, not merely for fuel or blood, but for the keeper's unwavering devotion, the return of his very center, his most essential self. With deliberate calm, Gabriel unsheathed a small vial of his own tears collected in a glass phial from the mirror trap. He uncorked it and let a single teardrop fall onto the handprint. The oil sizzled, mingling with the saline droplet, and the metal girder beneath glowed with golden light. The compass needle spun wildly, then steadied, aligning once more with true north. A pulse of wind leapt through the girder, and Gabriel felt the lighthouse's embrace, an almost tender tug, as though recognizing the sincerity of his craftsmanship. The handprint smoothed oil and salt, absorbed into the iron. He replaced the vial and stepped back, heart racing. At that moment, a crack split the sky as lightning forked across the clouds. Thunder replied instantly, and the lamp's beam faltered, then glowed brighter than it had ever before, flooding the night with crystalline fire. The lantern's glow beside Gabriel felt small in comparison, but he held it aloft, sharing in the beacon's brilliance. The reality-bending corridors below aligned the walls, knitting into their proper angles, the arches settling into known paths. Stone steps, leveled doors reappeared in expected places, and the lighthouse exhaled a deep, resounding hum like a sigh of relief. Gabriel's compass heart steady ticked softly in his hand. He retraced his steps along the girder, descending back through the hatch to the lamp room antechamber. The spiral sigils on the walls glowed faintly before fading altogether. In the chamber, the lantern rested on its stool, its flame dancing in the Fresnel's reflected exuberance. Gabriel set the compass on the desk and ran a hand across its polished face. He exhaled a tremor of exhaustion and triumph mingling in his chest. Reality had bent and twisted, but he had remained true to his inner north, offering every part of himself in steadfast service. The lighthouse's twilight transformation was complete. Outside, the storm clouds broke, revealing a night sky strewn with stars. The beam swept across the heavens, a ribbon of golden light tying sea to sky. Gabriel closed the journal gently and tucked it into his satchel. As he prepared for his final vigil, he felt a profound kinship with the lighthouse, both cursed and blessed to exist between worlds, guiding travelers safely through darkness. Gabriel descended the spiral staircase at first light, each footstep echoing softly against stone walls that had once conspired to confuse him. The corridors lay familiar and ordered now, their contours restored by his vow on the girder above. He carried only his satchel and lantern, the journal stowed beneath layers of leather. Outside, gulls cried over the calm sea, and salt breeze drifted through the slitted windows, carrying promise of an ordinary day. He paused at the threshold of the lamp room, hand on the iron handle. After weeks of vigilant ritual, he expected to feel its weight burden hunger, whispered demands, but found only quiet. With cautious resolve, he opened the door. Inside, light pulsed in gentle circles, the Fresnel lens rotating in even measured sweeps. Gabriel set the lantern on the stool and allowed himself a long exhale. The reservoir brimmed with clear oil. No blood tinged its surface. No oily handprints marked the floor. The mirror shard trap lay neatly coiled in its satchel pocket, dormant but ready. He circled the pedestal and inspected every inch of metal. The lamp's hum was low and content a refrain of obligation rather than torment. Reaching the desk, Gabriel found the oil-dark journal, lying open on the blotter pages, splayed to the final blank spread. He lifted the pen and wrote the last entry, Day 30. Keeper's absence. The tower rests at dawn. Its hunger echoes only in memory. The lamp's beam guides as it was meant, no bargains unpaid. I leave this record as testament. I was the keeper, and the cursed lighthouse keeper has vanished without a trace. He closed the journal and snapped the leather cords tightly. His own name, once inscribed at the beginning, felt distant, an echo of who he had been before the lighthouse claimed his devotion. He tucked the bound book into his satchel alongside the compass mirror shards and vials that bore witness to his service. As he turned to leave, the lamp's beam faltered. For the briefest instant, a shiver of doubt, and then resumed its sweep gold arcs regained without hesitation. Gabriel paused. In that heartbeat of uncertainty, he sensed the lighthouse's final farewell, a test of his release. He inhaled, steadying himself, and crossed the threshold. Outside, the path down to the harbor lay washed in sunrise. he descended the steps, two at a time, each landing echoing with the distant cry of ships preparing for departure. He passed the crew quarters empty now and reached the dock. Beneath a sky streaked with pink and violet, the MV Serenity drifted into view, guided by the renewed beacon. Gabriel raised a hand in silent greeting. At a small pier, he paused, turning to look up at the lighthouse. Its silhouette, once menacing, now seemed noble, a steadfast guardian perched on the cliff. The windows gleamed reflections of dawn and sea intermingling. He realized he had fulfilled his vow, offering heat, voice, pulse, sight, reflection, signal direction, spirit, and finally absence. Each sacrifice had bound him more tightly, then released him into the role he embraced and relinquished. Gabriel reached the boat's gangplank and stepped aboard. The crew greeted him with relieved smiles, unaware of the twilight trials that shaped his vigil. He tipped his hat and returned their nods, feeling the morning's warmth seep into his bones. Below deck, the captain clasped Gabriel's hand. "The light was flawless," she said. "You've done a remarkable job, keeper." Gabriel nodded, eyes on the horizon. "Safe travels," he replied quietly. Above the lighthouse stood silent its beam, carving grooves in the dawn sky. No trace remained of the hunger that once clawed at its core, only steady light, unwavering duty. As the ship pulled away, Gabriel watched until the crags of the island faded into mist. The journal compass and all tokens of service lay heavy in his satchel, but his heart felt unburdened. He had guided the light through storms of body and mind, sacrificing pieces of himself so that no ship would be lost. And now, at last, he vanished from its record keeper. No more memory, no longer shackled to the curse. The sea carried him onward toward new horizons and whispered possibilities. Behind him, the lighthouse stood, eternal sentinel of rock and flame, its keeper gone without a trace. Night and storm have passed, leaving only the soft glow of first light and the steady pulse of memory. What once loomed as an implacable sentinel has become a monument to resolve a tower of stone and glass that asked for warmth in darkness, voice in silence, and heart in the echo of its beam. Now, at dawn's tender edge, the labyrinth of corridors lies still, their shadows laid to rest by the unyielding sweep of the lighthouse's glow. Although Gabriel's vigil has ended, his reflection lingers in the spaces between light and shadow. A faint glimmer in a weathered window, the echo of footsteps on ancient stairs, and the whisper of a turning page, all tell of his passing. Though he left no footprints upon the cliffside, his final entry in the journal rests sealed, a testament to courage, not bound by ink, but by axe carried through the long watch. Tonight, whoever stands at the lamp's helm will find only strength in its golden beam and peace in the hush between rotations. The oil feeds flame without hunger, and the glass refracts nothing but guiding light. The whispers have faded, and the corridors no longer shift. The lighthouse's curse stands broken, its sentinel role restored to quiet duty. So as we close this tale, let the last image be of that steadfast beam traveling across dark waters to greet each new dawn. The world may forget the keeper who vanished, but every ship that finds safe harbor carries his silent promise that in the darkest hour, a light will shine steadfast and true. Good night, and may your dreams carry you safely into the morning's embrace.